Hey friends! Remember this last year, all this sanding throughout the summer, leaving us with this piece of almost Mercy tech? Well, I'm back, and here we go. So, Mercy has kind of become a bit of a running joke on the channel and on the stream. I'm not too big to admit that, but we are finally putting more work into her. I'm Hayze, this is Armour Brownies, and this is Mercy's chest plate. So, what did we do first? We had this object, it was based in Warbler, but Warbler was a bit strong, a bit resistant for me, and also really hard to smooth, because anything you smooth it down with will flex straight off it when you want to, if you want it to move or anything. So what we did, we spent a bunch of time using polyester filler, fine filler, filler spray, and sanding. And here you can see, we did it on stream, did a bunch of it on the stream. We did a load of it last summer, off stream, because how much sanding am I gonna put you guys through? But this year, I decided we're gonna mold it. I don't care if it needs to be perfect, because it's more important to have something done than it is have something perfect. So we sanded off the little bits that are the most egregious on it, and then we got to our mold making. In case you're wondering, this is what the chest plate looked like after we did the mold making. So as we get through this, through all the failures, wonder, oh, why don't you just use the original Warbler thing? It's because it's not really usable. If any of you think you can salvage this, give me drop me a message, and I'm sure I can send this your way. Anyway, on to the mold making. So we took our master, which here you can see we have sprayed it down a bit with a bit of white, just to give an impression to what it looks like, but also when you add colour to your master, it is easier to see where there are flaws in your sanding and there aren't. So here you can actually make out quite nicely that it's really lovely and smooth, apart from one patch, around this sort of area. You can see it on there, but you can also make out these grooves that we've cut in it. So the reason we're building up the edges with this clay is so there is a nice defined edge around the outline of this apron. I guess it's an apron. This torso armour. So we can actually introduce the thickness of the rubber when we get around to moulding it. It makes moulding much, much easier if there is a defined edge to your silicone mould. If you put that little bit of extra effort into the mould make, future you will thank you, especially since the Warbler is really thin and rubber that thin won't really work for what we need it, because this stuff needs to be at least 3 millimeters thick. How do we go about mould making such a weird big object? What we actually are going to do is use a technique called brush-on silicone or toothpaste silicone, whereby you mix a thixotropic agent in with your silicone, and as you can see, it goes from a liquid to something that sticks on our mixing stick without dropping off. And that stuff you can just brush on to vertical surfaces and horizontal surfaces. I suppose you can just brush it on and it stays there, is the important thing. Now you have to use brushes for it, otherwise if you just try and paste it on with a trowel, or as I've tried, a spatula, you will actually end up introducing bubbles to it. The brushes need to go over because they've got all the bristles, and the bristles go over and fill in all the gaps as you go. There's a reason it's called brush-on silicone, and I actually really didn't like it originally myself, because I didn't respect the fact that you should use a brush for it. So the first layer is the one you want to be the most careful with. We just want to get a nice, even pink layer over the entire thing. The reason the silicone is pink is because the catalyst that goes in it. Silicone starts off as white, at least this RTV condensation cure silicone, and then you add your catalyst. You mix the catalyst in, and as soon as the colour is even all the way through, with this one, it's pink, with some it's blue, with some it's white, with some it's transparent, you can tell that it is fully and thoroughly mixed, and there are no spots where there's too much catalyst or no spots where there's no catalyst. And then once we have our first layer down, we then get to put another thicker layer down. In fact, I believe I put 2 more layers on it, both quite thin, and then some big locator blocks. But I did that off stream because it's a lot of, it doesn't take too long to put down, say about 20 minutes, but then you have to wait a good few hours for it to set, and I didn't want to be streaming literally chemicals setting. But then also something we did off screen was do the mother mold for it, because for the mother mold, we used fiberglass. Now, these have turned out to be really nice handles, but that's not what they're actually here for. They are here because it is a long, thin mold, and they're to give it a bit of rigidity. But you can see here, the fiberglass holds this floppy silicone in the correct shape and has to be applied when the master is still in there. But once that's on, the whole thing holds itself fine. And you can see here, we have a bunch of the squares, which are the locators, which all slot into parts of this fiberglass. And now that we have this mold, my first attempt, I wanted to go with something I knew was good. So we actually used a solid resin, the same I used for my resin masks. We mixed it with a polyurethane fiber, which basically turns it from a liquid we can slush mold around the outside of a mold to something that is thick enough that we can brush on. And unfortunately, because I didn't have enough disposable brushes for this, because once the resin sets, that's the brush gone, I actually ended up using a spatula to apply this, and we did get some of the bubbles, and this is version 1 coming out of the mold. You can see we have to separate the silicone from the jacket, from the fiberglass jacket, and then once we have it all out, we can just peel the whole thing out, and this is the first casting with all its flaws. Our first attempt came out actually real good. I'm really happy with this. There's a little bit of extra sanding work we put into it, but you can see it's pretty good. It's pretty good. This is after we've sprayed it, but it's a bit heavy, and one of the problems we have with it is it's got no mobility to it, no flex to it. I don't know what I was expecting, but as a model maker, see my last video to find out what a model maker is, we are expected to be able to make, I don't know what that was. We are expected to be able to make models and objects using the correct materials for their purpose. Now, this would be perfect for I was about to say for a model, but in this context, you've got cosplay models, this would be perfect for a statue or a static design, something that isn't going to be worn, something that just wants to be on display, because you can sand it down, get it to a real nice finish. In fact, this would be perfect for like some very specific cosplay shots where you don't have to move. But since I will be bringing this costume to conventions with me, it doesn't really work for that. One of the bonuses of this one, however, is if you're at all worried about going out and about in a cosplay costume, I'm pretty sure this is stab proof. Anyway, after that we moved on to using a different type of resin. I have some resin which, unlike this stuff, will flex rather than snap, if that makes sense. So it's got a little bit of flex to it. So I thought if I used that, we might come out with a chest piece that is a bit more appropriate. However, turns out I didn't have as much resin as I thought I did. So we used what resin we had and then tried to take it out of the mold. And yeah, so this is Mark II. And as you can see, it's not overly inspiring. If anybody thinks they can make a costume out of this, let me know. But yeah, you can kind of see this stuff's a bit more flexible. And if it had more of this material, maybe it would be okay. But what we actually ended up doing with this is laying it up with some glass fiber. Instead of mixing in all of the powder that we did before to get the brush-on polyurethane resin, we tried to make this like fiberglass, but with a tissue soft glass fiber, and then with this resin. Turns out maybe it needs some more development. So Mark III of the Mercenary Valkyrie Battle Healing Armour. I'm sure there's an actual technical term for it, but I can't remember off the top of my head. We need to use some rubber. So what do we move on to? We have some Shore A60 which refers to the durometer test. So if you stab it with a tool, it tells you how strong it is. Polyurethane rubber. And we also have some white polyurethane pigment to mix in with it. And we have the same polyurethane powder to mix in with this stuff, which is also, and this is what I bought it for originally, so we can mix it in with that and brush it on rather than having to do a pouring mold. So yeah, much like the last one, we mix the polyurethane fiber in with the polyurethane rubber to get it a brushable consistency, and then we put on a couple of layers. However, as is becoming a theme, we ended up not having enough of this rubber to get a thick enough layer that I was happy with. But to back it up, I tried to put in a layer of fabric to give it some more tear strength so we could sew things to it, and also just make the whole thing a bit more stronger and rigid, kind of creating a bit of a composite. However, we demolded it a little while later, and this is what came out of the mold. It was whiter when it came out of the mold, but I left it out in the sun to try and help it set, but it's still sticky, and oh, it smells of rotten fish guts. It's horrid. And there's still patches of polyurethane pigment in it that are still like biscuity, and it's just really nasty. It's not, you can see in like the chest area that it really hasn't set. It really hasn't like kept its shape. And I don't know how much of that is down to this stuff. Oh, yikes, that probably shouldn't have come off. I don't know how much of that is down to it not really setting, not really being thick enough. I keep on running out of materials halfway through doing the things and then blaming the results on not having the right materials. This was version 3. If you are wondering why it's so hard for me to keep track of my chemicals, if that makes sense, because twice so far we've gone, we started using this material, oh, but we didn't have enough, so we did what we could and the product wasn't good enough. It's because I have a big shelf full of a lot of different chemicals. We have 3 types of silicone, 4 types of resins, 3 types of clear resins, a couple of types of polyurethane rubber, and some platinum silicone, all on this shelf, and it's hard to keep track of. I know I should keep an inventory of it, but I'm not the most organized human in the world. With those 3 attempts out of the way, we actually decided to take version 1, which was this thing, starting to feel like we're going Mark 1, Mark 2, Mark 3, like Iron Man suits. We trim this down, sand it down a bit, get some nice surface to it, and spray it. So that's why we have a nice object here now, because I treated it like I would just any other mask. It's not really cosplay wearable because it is too constrictive, as I said before, but you can see me here taking a Dremel to the edges, cutting the flash off, then we sand it down, hit it with some primer spray, and then I spray it with automotive spray or cellulose-based spray, which gets this lovely, glossy, deep white. And it's what most objects that you see in film and on screen are painted with. They are sprayed with cellulose-based spray, as that is your standard stuff for model making. So yeah, that is how we got to the finished version of this. But then we had to spend a bunch of time waiting for the correct rubber to show up. And I feel a bit guilty about this, but I spent some time working on kind of the anathema, that word to mercy. So yeah, if you want to be kept up to date with builds like this thing, you definitely should be checking out our YouTube channel, because this isn't the only Widowmaker thing we've been playing about with recently. Also, as a vague update, we have all of these 3D printed pieces for Mercy's staff and such. We have a bag full of 3D printed pieces that I'm going to be printing replacements for, because we're pivoting with Mercy's staff. I'm giving up on all of those really fancy electronics that I wanted to go inside it, and we're just going to make something rather than something perfect, because that's kind of my new motto for the actual hobby side of this. Finally, after not too much messing around, die! I'm prouder than I ever should be
about using Reaper's shotguns out of the testicles.
We actually got our actual proper rubber through, so to take a nice casting. And thankfully, we've learned how to use the polyurethane rubber. Armed with the correct sort of rubber, this being a Shore A70 rubber, again polyurethane rubber, so it is a 2-part rubber that we are mixing in less powder in with it. We have some more disposable brushes because that's one of the things that went wrong last time, and we're using what we learned last time. We are measuring out with a teaspoon this time the amount of powder that's going in there, so it's staying consistent. We are being a lot more conservative with the white pigment that we're putting in it, and we are also going to use the same trick of impregnating the back of it with fabric, which, as it turns out, was a really good idea. So that's something I'm happy with. The reason why I'm impregnating it with fabric is because there are some people at university who have done the same for silicone masks. If they are doing a silicone mask that you have to pull over your head, impregnating a mesh, a fabric mesh into that, will stop the mask shearing because the stress goes onto the fabric instead of the rest of it. And since this thing is going to be part of a harness that is going to have the big wings on it, we need it to be as strong as possible. And there we go. And with this one, we leave it a full 24 hours to dry. I'm not rushing it too much. And when we get it out of the mold, we have a big flappy mess because it doesn't have, still has all of the fabric around the sides. So I spend a little while with a very sharp scalpel. In fact, I swap the scalpel blades as often as I can. That's one of the things you definitely need as a model maker, as a crafter of any kind, is just a constant supply of sharp scalpels. You're more likely to injure yourself with a blunt scalpel than a sharp scalpel, and get yourself one of those little yellow pots to be able to dispose of the sharps. So I've got a little sharp bin that's actually filled up over the last couple of years, so I need to replace it soon. But anyway, after trimming down the edges, we have this fantastic, wearable and flexible chest piece. As you can see, I'm super happy with it on stream. And what we need to do now is figure out how to paint polyurethane rubber, which is a notoriously difficult thing to paint. Anyway, we have plenty more coming up. If you want to see where Widowmaker has gotten to, you will need to tune in onto the streams. I will be carrying on with our Vectra videos soon, so you can see how we got to the end of that. And there are new cosplay plans in the works because this summer I plan to get my 3 main cosplay actually finished. Let's stop Mercy being a running joke together, friends. So thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.